Welcome to Bad Take Philly.
Oh, he hits the upright again.
Bears season's going to end on a double doink.
Oh, my God.
Deep to right field. Way up there and way out of here.
Art.
Yang, the offensive rebound. And lead.
And for the Philadelphia Eagles, the long drought is over.
The swing of the miss. Struck him out. The Philadelphia Phillies are world champions of baseball.
All right, welcome back to Bad Take Philly. We have a special guest today. First time in our podcast history that we have a guest. We have former Philadelphia Inquirer writer Marc Narducci. He wrote there for 37 years. He's also in the South Jersey Sports Hall of Fame. Now he's a freelance writer, really covering whatever. So glad to have you. First question, just like get you introduced to the podcast. How did you get started in the industry of sports writing?
Well, actually, I got started. I actually got started doing television. I was a cable TV local anchor and everything. And I saw where the industry was going. And I said, I better learn how to do something else. So I started freelancing for like local weeklies. I called the Courier Post, did a few things for them. And then in 1984, the Inquirer started up a South Jersey bureau where they did heavily in the South Jersey sports, high school sports. And I was hired not as a full-timer, but back then you got all the work you could want as a freelancer. And I was with them up until last summer.
So would you say like getting started in like high school sports? Because I saw that you've covered everything from like high school sports, Temple football, Sixers, like any sport. So like having that background in like high school sports like helped you to just kind of cover like anything because you're so like well versed in what you covered.
Well, that's a good question, but whether it's sports or news or whatever, you should be well versed in a lot of things. And early in my career, one of the things I said was I never said no to an assignment. So I'd be asked to do I'd be asked to do like field hockey, or I'd be asked to do something I wasn't as acquainted with. And, I got to know it and knew the subject. So I never said no. I was always available. And I think that really helped me out early in my career. And I think that any sports writer or sportscaster can be versatile. It's just a matter of doing some homework and, putting the time in.
So obviously there's a huge skill gap, and there's a big difference between high school and college and like pro sports. Did you notice anything different from the writing or the broadcasting aspect, that it's a big difference, or is it kind of same throughout?
Well, no, the writing is much different than the broadcasting aspect. I mean, just the deadlines, what you have to adhere to. Broadcasting, you're a little more freer. I do a lot of games still now. I'm doing a lot of live streaming stuff and everything like that. You have more time and everything. Writing, you're in a more narrow window in the work. It's totally different thing, but it's still the same concept. You're reporting, you're trying to put stuff out that's interesting, and you're trying to get the best story out there, whether it's in the written word or the spoken word.
So for good stories, the Phillies, they have a possible good postseason run going this year. Do you think that we're in the position to make that push with our current team, or should we make some additions at the deadline?
I think they're going to look at the deadline. I mean, John Middleton he went over that luxury tax and everything like that. They hope they get Bryce Harper back in sometime in August, so that'll almost be like an addition in itself. I think, Dave Dombrowski's history as he goes for it, do they throw a minor leaguer like Logan O'Hoppe in there and give one of their better prospects? They're certainly not going to give Painter or Abel, their two top pitching prospects. I know that those two guys are off limits. I don't know how high a prospect I would give, but you can make the argument they should really go for it because they have an older team right now. I think they're going to do something, but I think even if they don't do anything, if they can stay relatively injury-free from here on, I think they certainly have a good shot at the wild card.
Cool.
Yeah, it is exciting. And do you have a specific, if they do make a move at the deadline, do you think they should, because there was a lot of talk for center fielder a couple of weeks ago, but now there's talk for getting a shortstop, and they can really do anything with the middle infield, and Bierling's kind of shown that he can move around in the outfield. Do you think that they should go for a specific position, or really just the best guy they can get?
I think if they can get a center fielder, that's kind of what I would look for. You know, people talk about Verling. He hasn't exactly set the world on fire. Let's be honest. I mean, he's been an upgrade. I mean, Mickey Moniak, I just think is overmatched. So center field would be a place I would look, but starting pitching as well. I'd be worried if I were the Phillies about Zach Eflin. Keeps having the knee problems. He's obviously effective when he's in there. You take him out, that's a big piece out of there. So I think they may look for a fringe, number 4, number 5 starter, and you're always looking to improve the bullpen. And of all the people at trade deadline, there are always bullpen arms that are going to be the most available.
Do you have any questions, Dalton?
There we go. So is there anything about this Phillies team that reminds you of the better times, we'll say, from like 2008, those teams, or is it not even close?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question. If you look at it, I mean, did the 2008 team, I mean, obviously with Cole Hamels led the rotation, but did they have a better 1-2 punch than Wheeler and Nola? I think the starting pitching, is pretty good. I think that the 2008 team was a better offensive team. I think they played the game better. They didn't strike out as much, even though, you had a guy like Ryan Howard who was a power guy. I think the 2008 team was obviously better, but I think this team, if Eflin's healthy, I think this team's starting rotation can certainly match up with that. I don't want to put them right on the par with the 2008 team because that team won the World Series, and this team's still scrambling to get to the 3rd wild card spot.
Yeah. Thank you. One more question about the Phillies. What would you think that like a good outcome would be for the Phillies? Is it make the playoffs, lose the first round, make the playoffs, maybe win a round? Like, what would you be satisfied with?
Well, I think, you're getting a little greedy now because they haven't been in the playoffs since 2011. So most people would say, just get in the playoffs. I think in the playoffs with a rotation fronted by Wheeler and Nola, if they're healthy, I don't know if I'd want to face the Phillies, but to answer your question, getting to the playoffs would be the minimum. First round, kind of acceptable. But if they don't get to the playoffs, it would be a major disappointment. And I think if they got to the playoffs and like were swept or something, that would be disappointing too. So I'll go with getting there definitely and winning at least a round.
I think we agree with that.
Yeah. And just one more Phillies question. Obviously with the firing of Girardi and Thompson coming in, there's just a different feel. Like there's obviously a different motivation and feeling in the clubhouse. And there's always going to be like a good or bad kind of just vibe in the clubhouse, like depending on a coaching staff, depending on a manager. Have you covered teams that you remember having a significantly good feeling or bad feeling, or like not liking their coaching staff? Yeah,
I think that the one sport that goes is Chip Kelly, especially his last year with the Eagles. That was sort of a disaster. This thing with Girardi, we all know he's a good baseball guy. We all know the success he had first with the Marlins, then with the Yankees. But the bottom line was he just didn't do a good job, whether the players felt too tense around him, whether he relied too much on analytics. I'm not saying he's a bad manager. I'm saying in this situation, he did a bad job. And I think that was kind of affecting the Phillies. I think they were kind of tight. I was in the clubhouse a couple of weeks ago, and they just seemed like a looser team. That doesn't mean Joe Girardi's a bad baseball guy. He just was not a good fit for this team.
All right. Let's transition to the Sixers. I'm cautiously, I have some optimism that the offseason additions, bringing in PJ Tucker, bringing in DeAnthony Melton, they got younger, they got tougher. So I think that they could potentially be a top 2 team in the conference. There's a lot of great teams in the conference, but I feel like those like just upgrading the bench is going to really help him out. So I kind of want to get your read on the situation, what you think, like how much have they improved this all season?
I think that's a good question. I think they've improved, although I have to take you to task. I'm not sure you can say they get younger when they signed PJ Tucker, who's 37, but he plays a lot younger, and he is just he's a monster to play against. I mean, look what he did when the Bucks won it. Look what he did last year against the Sixers with the Heat. So I think he's going to be a major addition. The question with PJ Tucker is in the third year of that contract, when he's 40 years old, how's he going to hold up? But they're not worried about that. This is a win now situation. And Melton, certainly like him defensively as well. I worry about the fact that he did fall out of the Memphis rotation during the playoffs this year. So you're going to have to look for some consistency on offense. But they are a better team. They're certainly a better defensive team. But the whole key to them is James Harden. You see a slimmed down James Harden in all these pictures. He's apparently taking less money he's being so unselfish and settling for $32 million or whatever he's going to settle for this year. But he's going to be the key, because he was terrible in the postseason. He had one good game against Miami, but he was terrible. And for him to, 2 shots in the second half in game 6 and not taking that responsibility. Now, he could say it's the hamstring, but here's what worries me about James Harden. He had the hamstring last year. He had it the year before. He's going to be 33 years old. He's never been in the best of shape, although the pictures you see of him now are good. So I think he's the one. And if James Harden plays the way James Harden can play, I agree with you. They could be a top 2 team in the East. Although I like Milwaukee and Boston, especially with the addition of Brogdon. I know Brogdon gets hurt a lot, but they certainly needed a guy that could handle the ball. I think Marcus Smart is too careless at times handling the ball. So I think Brogdon's going to help them. So I think they are the top 3 teams in the East. We don't know what Miami's going to be. Are they going to have Kevin Durant on their team or not? But you can't count the Heat out as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I want to touch on Ben Simmons because the city is still kind of obsessed with him, us included. And your last big coverage piece was the Sixers playoff run in 2021. So I kind of just wanted to see if you noticed during that playoff run, especially with how Game 7, the whole non-dunk. If you noticed a kind of feel with Simmons or the team in general that there's just something off, kind of in the locker room.
Well, the problem with Simmons, and especially in that Atlanta series that we all allude to, is how poorly he was shooting free throws. And that set the table for everything, because he was afraid to get fouled and go to the foul line. So he didn't shoot in the second half. He certainly, what did he take, 4 shots in the fourth quarter in the last 4 games or something like that? So that was the problem. He was an offensive liability with the team. And how could it not affect the team that way? Embiid making the comments about that. Rivers, I think, kind of got a little trapped into the wondering if we can win without Ben. He probably would like to have that answer back, but he was being forthright. And when Ben Simmons stopped shooting and lost his confidence, he was no longer the 3-time All-Star that we knew about. And no matter how well you play defense, in the playoffs, you can't play 4-on-5, and that's what the Sixers were doing. So, I mean, whether he requested a trade or not, the best thing that happened was him leaving. I don't know what he has left. I don't know what the fire is in his belly. I do know the guy is extremely talented. So we'll just have to see. But if he doesn't show the desire and the fire, then the Nets are going to find out what the Sixers found out.
Yeah, with everything that went down with Simmons and kind of what happened with Harden in the playoffs last year, like you said, he kind of just disappeared. There's been clear frustration from Embiid. Do you fear that he's going to want to leave eventually and go down to Miami, like people say, or just go somewhere else and try to contend for a championship if we keep hitting the same roadblock in the playoffs?
I think that could happen, but Embiid also has to be a little bit better of a leader. I think he kind of bails out and he kind of like blames people and everything like that. Now I know he was courageous in coming back and playing and everything, but he didn't play well, especially in those last 2 games against Miami. He's had his struggles at times, so he's got to be a type of guy that just I think has to be a better leader. I don't think you can fear him wanting to get out of there. I think they're just all in to trying to win because they know, let's be honest, how many more great years does he have? The thing that the Sixers, I think, really regret is he has 2 of the great NBA seasons back to back, and he was runner up in the MVP both years, and they wasted them. They get to the second round. So with his injury history and everything like that, I mean, they're all in on going now. I think in the back of their minds, they're worried about maybe Embiid may not want to be here. But right now, I think they're just focused on going all in, putting all the chips in for this year.
Yeah. Do you want to shift to training camp?
Yeah, so talking to you.
Do you want to?
I can do it.
Okay. So with the training camp is it less than a week now?
I think it's this week.
26th, right? The 26th.
Yeah. So with training camp coming up, what's like a normal kind of day in a writer's world for training camp? Because obviously it's going to be different from the players.
Well, it's interesting. When I first started covering training camp, they were still playing at Lehigh. And that was a whole different thing, the commute up there. I mean, a lot of writers stayed up there. I used to prefer to come home. So you're on the road a lot. First of all, to begin with, you're getting there, whatever it is, 7 a.m. You're getting out of there at like 6 p.m. and going home, and maybe even later because you're writing there. Now that it's at the NovaCare complex, it's a little more compact, but it's still long days. The one thing about the NFL, though, from a writer's standpoint or a reporter standpoint, it's a little better. In the old days, they'd have double sessions and all that. They don't work as hard in training camp, so the sessions aren't as long. So you're not there as long, but it's full. It's long days. Because as a writer, you're not only getting stuff for the next day's editions and stuff. You're getting stuff for preseason tabs. You're getting stuff for down the road. So it's a long. I always thought training camp, obviously it's grueling for the players. I always thought it was grueling for the writers as well.
So every team goes into a season saying, oh, like we want to, get to the playoffs. Like the ultimate goal is to win the Super Bowl. Well, obviously not every team is cut out for that. So did you notice, like, going into a season, like just watching training camp, you're like, oh wow, this team actually does have a shot to do something? Or did you go, oh, I don't, think we're going to be very good this year? Like, could you kind of like pick up on that in training camp?
I think in 2017 there was a real vibe in that training camp that, you know what, these guys. Now, I'm not saying people were saying they were going to win the Super Bowl, but there was a real vibe there. So yeah, you can kind of feel it, and a lot of times it's just the addition of people. You remember back in 2004 when T.O. came and how much he brought to the team, and they got to the Super Bowl, and then after that it was a disaster. But just one person can do that, and that's why this year I'm really looking. I think the big story is going to be the impact of A.J. Brown, because he's a confident player. He's got a pretty good track record. Yes, last year he was a little banged up. He didn't have as good a year as his first 2 years. But the pressure he's going to take off the other receivers and the big play capability and helping Jalen Hurts. So I think he's a guy that, to me, is the story of the training camp, because he's one of these guys that can change the whole vibe into making it a real positive situation.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on the 2017 team. What was it like to cover that team? Because it was such an exciting time for the city, obviously being the first Super Bowl. And I know you were able to interview players. I watched your Corey Clement interview. What was that like to just be be part of that process?
Well, full disclosure, back then I was doing more with the colleges and the NBA, but they told me, I did some stuff in training camp, and then I didn't do a lot during the season, but they told me I was going to be covering the team in the postseason as far as they advanced. So by then I really got to get the vibe, and it was just there was just such a confident team. And when they crushed the Vikings to win the NFC Championship game, I mean, and there was like no surprise that they did that. They thought that they were that good. And even though Wentz was out and Foles was in, it was a team that was just on the same page together. And they were selfless players. You didn't hear people talking about stats or anything like that. And again, people like to bash Wentz, but I like to say without him, they wouldn't have got there, because he gave them that confidence in the regular season. I guess they were 11-2 when he got hurt and everything like that. So it was just everybody pulling together, and it was quite a vibe. And I remember covering the Super Bowl that I think the players were a little ticked off that, New England was getting all that, New England this, New England that. And I think that they obviously believed they could do it. And it was just one of the great runs. I mean, you look at that year, lightning hit the bottle. Every move that Howie made turned out great. I mean, you got guys like Garrett Blunt. I mean, every move he made, Alshon Jeffrey, as much as people bash him, again, they wouldn't have been Super Bowl champions without him. A lot of great moves, and just everything aligned together for that season.
So the team didn't really waver when Wentz went down and Foles was the starter, because he didn't play great in the Falcons game. He did struggle at the beginning of the postseason, but we saw obviously in the Vikings game, we were the Super Bowl team, but they didn't have any doubt that Foles was the guy.
Oh no, they had no doubts about that. And you make a good point, Brendan, because people forget they were one Julio Jones catch in the end zone away from being eliminated that year. And Foles didn't play great that game, but then he had a 2-game stretch against the Vikings and the Pats that was just, it was just magical. But they were always confident in Foles. And the thing about Foles is he was always confident in himself too. He never looked at himself as a backup. I just find his career fascinating in that he's never really had great success other than being in Philadelphia the 2 times. And every other time when he had chances to be the guy, it just never worked out.
So you covered Temple football, and you got to interview Hassan Reddick while he was still in college. So how cool is it seeing a guy like him, in college, and then he eventually developed into this great sack guy in the NFL? How cool is it just seeing guys starting college and then eventually become a big name NFL player?
You always like to see that. And the other thing that's cool about Hassan Reddick is he's such a good guy. You see him doing these camps for kids. He's just a really good guy. And I loved following his success at Temple, and I'm just thrilled that he's had this kind of success here. I'm so old, I covered him when he was in high school at Haddon Heights too, where he was not a star at all. He was injured his senior year, and that's why there were no scholarship offers or anything like that. So a guy like Hassan Reddick, I'm just so happy for him, because he came from the lowest ground and worked his way up, and he did it at Temple. And people said he was a busted draft pick and everything. And then the Cardinals decided maybe we'll use him in a different manner of rushing the passer. And then the Panthers did the same thing, and he's had double-digit sacks the last 2 years. And I think he's going to have it again this year with the Eagles.
One last question. We're about to run out of time in a bit. But I just want to know, on a personal writer level, what was your favorite interview you've ever done? Any standouts for whether it be coach, players? What was just your favorite interview type?
I think Kobe Bryant at one of the All-Star games I covered, may have been in Denver, I forget. And he was just opening up about everything. It's not just one thing that he said, but just how he was analytical and analyzing the game. And the other thing I loved about Bryant is he's multilingual. So the Italian press was asking him questions, and he's talking to Italian to them. And I just think Kobe Bryant, that was the couple times that I've done it with him, that I did it with him. I think he ranks right up there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you coming on, because obviously you have a lot of insight, more experience. But yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.